Have you ever, like, thought about what you'd grab, if you had just minutes to escape a fire? It's a scary thought. But it's exactly what Annalise Cochran faced during that awful wildfire in Lahina, Maui last August. And today we're going to dive into her story using an episode of Real Survival Stories.
Yeah, what strikes me is how this story, it's not just about escaping, the flames. It's about how people adapt when they're under pressure.
Yeah.
We'll see how Annalise's background, combined with, split-second decisions, really shaped her fate.
Right. It wasn't just luck that helped her. So the story starts on a regular windy day. Annalise is home. She's off work because the rough seas have shut down her marine conservation work. There are reports of a wildfire, but online it says contained so.
Oh.
It's almost like a false sense of security.
Yeah, and that's exactly where the danger is, right? We're so reliant on technology these days that we forget to, trust our own senses sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And she notices some smoke,
Ah.
but she kind of dismisses it, thinking it's from that contained fire miles away.
Yeah.
Even when the smoke detectors go off, there's no official evacuation order.
Yeah.
So the urgency isn't really there yet.
This is where her upbringing becomes really important. She talks about her, quote, Eagle Scout dad, instilling the sense of preparedness. So even though, officially everything is fine, she starts packing a go bag.
And it's a good thing she did. It wasn't just like, practical stuff.
Yeah.
She packed irreplaceable family jewelry, a drawer of memories, things you can't replace if the worst happens.
Right.
It makes you think, what would you grab?
It really does. It's a question we should all ask ourselves, I think, because when you're in that crisis, what you choose to save says a lot about what's important to you.
Oh.
Yeah.
Then things escalate really quickly. Her neighbor, Steve, is on the roof, trying to put out embers that are landing like fiery rain. But it's a losing battle.
Oh, wow. That paints such a vivid picture of that danger escalating. Imagine, the wind whipping around the sky, getting dark from all the smoke, and these burning embers falling faster and faster. It's like the fire is feeding on the air.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
And there's still no official alarms or evacuation orders.
Right.
This is where the human element really comes in. And Lise tries to convince her elderly neighbor, Freeman, and another neighbor, Tina, to evacuate with her. But Freeman hesitates. He doesn't want to leave his home.
Oh, I see.
And Tina, bless her heart, refuses to abandon Freeman.
Oh, wow.
This says so much about community,
Yeah.
especially in a crisis. It's a reminder that sometimes human connection is the strongest thing we have.
Yeah, for sure.
So powerful.
Yeah.
They decide to leave on foot. But as Annalise is watching them go, this huge piece of burning debris lands right between them,
Oh, no.
cutting her off from them.
Wow.
Talk about a scary moment.
Yeah.
She makes a split-second decision, jumps in her car, and starts driving. But the roads are totally jammed. It's pure chaos. Imagine smoke, stinging your eyes, flames all around you, people running in panic. It's like a disaster movie.
Yeah.
And yet it was all too real for the people of Lahina. It shows how quickly things can fall apart in a crisis.
Right.
People making these life or death choices with very little information.
Yeah.
A tourist named jumps in her car, desperate to escape. He wants her to drive back inland. But Annalise, based on her knowledge of the area, senses that's where the fire's coming from. Naeem runs ahead and confirms her fears. It's a wall of flames. They're trapped.
This is where her maritime training becomes so important. She remembers the abandoned ship drill, a principle that says you don't abandon your vessel until you have a lifeboat ready.
Well, and I need a little help here. How does that apply to a wildfire? I mean, there's no boat, no life raft.
Right. That's the brilliance of it, applying knowledge from one situation to another. The principle is the same. Don't make a desperate move unless you have a better option. Most people would have just run from the car in a panic, potentially running right into danger. Annalise stayed put, assessed her options, bought herself some time.
That's incredible. So she's in the car waiting closer, and unbelievably, Freeman and Tina make it to her car. They manage to cover the same distance on foot through all that smoke and chaos.
This is another thing you see a lot in survival stories. Luck favors the prepared mind. They were ready to act when the opportunity came up.
Wow. It's like fate stepped in. But before joining them, Annalise goes back to her car. She has this baby bird chicad that she's been caring for, and even though she might not make it herself, she feeds the bird one last time.
Oh, wow. That is such a small act of kindness, but it's so revealing. Even facing this huge danger, she's still thinking about this tiny little creature.
Yeah. And then she sends one final text to her mom, a message that captures how unreal this all was. La is gone. I'm about to jump into the ocean lull.
It gives me chills just thinking about it.
Yeah. It's like she's finding humor in this dark moment, a way to deal with the unthinkable, trying to hold on to some normalcy.
At the seawall, it's total desperation. People are making impossible choices, fleeing by car, running on foot, some even swimming out into the ocean.
And this is where her knowledge of the ocean really matters.
Yeah.
Most people would see the water as an escape, but she knows it has its own dangers. Strong currents, murky water, and, well, sharks.
Right. It's easy to forget that the ocean can be just as dangerous as a wildfire. It's a whole other survival situation.
Exactly. And this is where her experience makes her a leader. She's able to look at the situation, weigh the risks, and advise those around her. She tells people to stay close to the rocks, helps them wet their hair and clothing to protect against the embers.
Wow. It's amazing how even in a moment like that, the human instinct to help others comes out. She's not just worried about herself, but about the people around her. It speaks to that deep human need for connection, for community, especially when we're facing a threat together. It's like an instinct that kicks in. We're stronger together.
She manages to call her mom briefly, thanks to Atina's phone. But then another woman, Michelle, needs to use the phone. Michelle is desperately trying to reach her elderly father, who's trapped on the other side of the fire.
This is where we see how far-reaching a disaster can be. It's not just the people in the flames. It's the loved ones who are separated, afraid for them, holding on to any hope they can.
It's a reminder that the impact goes way beyond the fire itself. It reaches the hearts and minds of everyone connected to the victims.
Absolutely.
And as Michelle breaks down after the call, Anelise, seeing her panic, steps up and says, "I am going to live today. That's my goal. I'm going to live. And if you would like to live, I recommend that you stay with me because I'm going to live."
Wow. What a powerful thing to say. In all this chaos and fear, she finds the strength not only to comfort Michelle, but to reaffirm her own will to survive. It's really remarkable leadership.
Yeah, it really is. It's a testament to how strong the human spirit can be, how we can find strength even when everything seems lost. There's this spark of hope, a will to live that can be incredibly strong.
Yeah.
So they huddle together watching the sun disappear behind a wall of smoke, knowing the hardest part is yet to come.
Yeah. So we left off with Anelise huddled on the rocks at the seawall, with Michelle and a few others bracing for a long night, with the fire raging all around them.
Knowing there's no escape, just a fire on one side and the vast dark ocean on the other, it's hard to even imagine the fear they must have felt.
And remember, it's not just the flames themselves, it's that intense heat radiating outward, the smoke stinging their eyes, filling their lungs, and that constant bombardment of burning debris carried by that relentless wind.
The podcast describes these huge pieces of burning debris like sheets of plywood and lumber being hurled towards them.
Wow.
Some so large that the ocean couldn't even put them out.
Imagine that the waves, usually a source of peace, pushing flaming debris towards you, the very ocean, a symbol of life, transformed into a potential threat. It's a truly apocalyptic image.
As darkness falls, the gravity of their situation becomes even more apparent. The fire has knocked out the power lines, plunging the whole town into this eerie darkness.
This sensory deprivation must have been incredibly disorienting. Imagine being bombarded by heat and noise, but unable to see clearly. This makes rational decision-making incredibly difficult. Yet, Anelise had to stay sharp, had to keep thinking clearly to survive.
They're completely isolated, cut off from the outside world with no lights to guide them, no way to signal for help, no way to know what's happening beyond their immediate surroundings. It's a terrifying thought to be so utterly alone in the middle of such chaos.
And the wind is still howling, creating this constant deafening roar that drowns out everything else. It's like being trapped in a nightmare where your senses are overloaded with danger, but you can't see or hear anything clearly enough to make sense of it.
Anelise describes the next few hours as a blur, a relentless cycle of being drenched by the waves, choking on the thick smoke, and dodging burning debris. It must have felt like an eternity.
And all the while, they have to keep moving, constantly adjusting their position to find even a little bit of safety. It's a relentless battle against the elements, a fight for survival that demands every ounce of their strength and willpower.
She's also really worried about Atina and Freeman. Atina is in relatively good health, but Freeman is elderly and frail, and these harsh conditions are taking their toll on him. It's a reminder that in a disaster, the most vulnerable among us are often the hardest hit.
Absolutely. Their needs become even more acute in these extreme situations, requiring additional care and attention. It adds another layer of complexity to an already dire situation.
Sometime during that long night, a small boat appears, cutting through the darkness. It's a local fisherman who's risking his own life to come help. He's able to take a few people, mostly women and children, away from the immediate danger. But his boat is small. There isn't room for everyone.
This must have been such a difficult decision, having to choose who gets to leave and who has to stay behind, knowing that every choice carries immense weight and potential consequences.
And Elise, thinking of Atina's safety, urges her to go with the fisherman, knowing she needs to get away from this inferno. But Atina, true to her character, refuses to leave Freeman behind. She's putting her own life at risk to stay with her friend. It's an incredible act of selflessness.
It's a testament to the power of human connection, the unwavering loyalty that can bind people together even in the darkest of times. Atina's compassion in the face of such danger is truly inspiring.
And Freeman, realizing he's putting Atina at risk, finally agrees to go. So they board the boat, leaving Anelise alone on the rocks with a handful of other survivors. Can you imagine the mix of emotions? She must have been feeling relief for her friends, but also the stark reality of facing this ordeal alone.
It's a pivotal moment for Annalise. She's lost her companions, the fire is still raging, and the night is far from over. The weight of her situation must have been crushing. Yet she doesn't give up. She's determined to survive, and she focuses on what she needs to do to stay alive.
That resilience is just incredible. It would be so easy to succumb to despair in a situation like that. But Annalise refuses to let fear paralyze her. Instead, she keeps moving, keeps her head down, and focuses on each breath, drawing strength from within.
It speaks to the power of the human spirit, the ability to tap into inner reserves of strength we often don't even know we possess. It's in those moments of extreme challenge that we truly discover what we're capable of.
As the night wears on, the wind begins to die down, and the fire seems to lose some of its intensity. It's a glimmer of hope, a sign that the worst might be over.
This shift in the wind is a crucial turning point. It's a reminder that even in the midst of chaos and destruction, nature can sometimes offer a reprieve, a chance for the situation to change.
But even with the wind dying down, the ordeal is far from over. The embers are still falling. The smoke is still thick and choking, and the threat remains. They're still stranded on those rocks, exhausted, injured, and uncertain of what the future holds.
Their fight for survival isn't over, yet they've endured a terrifying night. But the dawn brings new challenges, new uncertainties, and a long road to recovery.
So we left off with Annalise and the other survivors huddled on those rocks, the fire finally starting to die down after a terrifying night. It's hard to imagine what that moment must have been like, the first light of dawn revealing how much destruction was all around them.
Yeah, the change from dark to light, it must have been both good and bad. The darkness was kind of protecting them, hiding how bad the damage really was. But dawn, while it brought hope, also showed the harsh reality of what they had just lived through.
The podcast describes the scene as like something out of a nightmare. Buildings, just piles of rubble, the familiar landmarks of Lahina gone, replaced by just complete destruction. It must have felt like waking up in a totally different world.
And in all of this destruction, Annalise is still stuck on those rocks, exhausted, hurt, surrounded by others who've been through the same awful thing. It's a moment of collective trauma, a shared understanding of what they've just endured.
But with daylight comes a feeling of hope. People start moving around carefully, trying to get their bearings, figure out what's going on, search for any sign of help.
Right, and this is when the first responders can finally get to them. Remember, the fire was so intense, the conditions so crazy that rescue efforts were impossible during the night. Now, with the fire dying down, help can finally reach the people who are trapped.
Annalise says the arrival of the Coast Guard was just this overwhelming relief. They weren't alone anymore. Help had finally arrived. It must have been such an emotional moment, a mix of relief, gratitude, exhaustion, and maybe even disbelief.
Absolutely. It's that point where your body and mind can finally start to relax knowing that you're safe. But it's also the start of something new, the realization that the road to recovery is just beginning.
They were taken to a harbor nearby where medical teams were ready to check and treat their injuries. Many, including Annalise, were suffering from smoke inhalation and burns, physical reminders of what they had gone through.
And we can't forget that physical injuries are only part of it. The mental and emotional trauma of surviving something like this can be really deep and last a long time. It's like your brain hits pause on dealing with the emotions, a way to help you get through the crisis. But it makes coming back to reality, dealing with the emotional fallout, even harder.
Annalise talks about feeling numb, confused, almost disconnected from reality right after. It's as if her mind couldn't quite process how big and awful everything that had happened was.
Yeah, that's a very normal reaction to trauma. It takes time for our minds to work through such a shocking event to understand the chaos and the loss. It's a journey that needs patient support and understanding.
Eventually, she finds Atina and Freeman again, who were also rescued from the harbor. It's hard to imagine the joy and relief they must have felt, seeing each other, knowing they had all made it through that fire.
That reunion must have been so powerful. a moment of shared victory over such hardship. It shows how strong their bond was, how they looked after each other, even when facing such danger.
But even with that happy reunion, the story isn't over. Anelise survived the fire, but she lost her home, her community, almost everything she owned. It reminds us that the effects of a disaster go way beyond just the event itself.
Exactly. This is what we call the long tail of disaster. The immediate crisis might be over, but the recovery process is just starting. Rebuilding lives, communities, a sense of normalcy can take years or even decades.
Annalise later learns that the baby bird chicken didn't make it. Her car, just like so many others, was destroyed in the flames. It's a sad reminder that disaster doesn't discriminate how it can affect even the smallest, most vulnerable creatures.
It really highlights how fragile life is, how even with human resilience, some losses are inevitable. It makes you think about cherishing the moments we have, the connections we make, because everything can change so quickly.
But even with all the loss and devastation, there are also stories of resilience, courage, and compassion. Annalise talks about the incredible support she got from complete strangers, acts of kindness that helped her through those first really tough days.
Right. This is where we see the true strength of community, how people band together to help each other when they need it most. It reminds us that even in the face of tragedy, there's still hope in humanity.
Looking back on everything, Annalise talks about how important it is to be prepared to trust your gut and the importance of community. These are things we can all learn from no matter where we live or what challenges we face.
It's a powerful message of resilience, hope, and the strength of the human spirit. Annalise's story shows us that while we can't always control what happens to us, we can control how we prepare for those things, how we react to them, and how we support one another afterward.
It's a reminder that we're all in this together, that even when things are really bad, there are people who care and want to help, and that even with terrible loss, there's always a reason to keep going, to find hope, and to rebuild. And that's it for this deep dive into Annalise Cochran's incredible story of survival. We explored her harrowing journey through the Lahina wildfire and the lessons we can all learn from her experience. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the deep dive for more fascinating stories and discussions. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and take care.